crippled and discarded by her family. A Lakota chief carried her home and gave her healing hands. The horse had been dead 3 days when I found her. Not the woman, the horse. A big roan gelding, flies thick on him already in the September cold. She was sitting with her back against his belly like a wall she'd built herself, and she did not look up when I rode in. I came within 20 feet before she moved just her head, slow and deliberate, the way an animal moves when it has decided it won't run anymore. I stopped. Her left leg was wrong. I could see it through the tattered hem of her dress, angled at the shin like a question mark, old damage and healed badly. The foot turned inward, not from the horse. That leg had been like that a long time. The rest of her looked like trail. Cracked lips, one cheek purpled from the cold or a fall, a wool coat that had been a good coat maybe 2 winters ago. Small canvas sack beside her, its cord tied 3 times the way a person ties things they cannot afford to lose. She said in English, "I'm not going back." I did not ask where back was. It is the first thing a person tells you when they're done pretending they want to be found. I am Cha Nupa Manny, walking pipe. Some of the traders called me Clement because Clement is easier than a name that belongs to a different world than theirs. My mother gave me the name I kept. I was 51 years old that autumn, and I had been a chief for 11 of those years, and before that a warrior, and before that a boy who loved horses more than anything still living. I had 2 daughters and 1 son and a wife who had been buried 4 springs ago in a place I could find with my eyes shut, by smell alone, sage, and the particular cold of a north-facing slope. I had not remarried. People thought I would. I did not. The camp I led was a small band then, 60 people, maybe less. We were not at war. We had made our agreements and we had kept them, and the Wasichu soldiers had broken theirs, and we had stepped back from the edge of the kind of war that ends with women and children cold in the snow, and I had done the stepping, and half my men had never fully forgiven me for it. That was the shape of my life when I came across that dead horse and that woman who was not going back. I said, "Do you need water?" She looked at the skin bag hanging from my saddle. "Yes," she said. I got down, handed it to her, watched her drink 2 careful swallows and stop. That told me something. She wasn't delirious. She'd had some water from somewhere. She was managing herself. She handed the bag back and held it out at the exact length of her arm, not letting my hand touch hers, which I noticed and said nothing about. "How long has the horse been down?" "3rd day," she said. "You slept out here 3 nights. 2.5. She was not asking for pity. She was correcting me. "Your leg," I said. "Did it happen out here, or is it old?" "Old." She said the word like she was placing a stone down. "Done." "Can you walk on it?" "Some, not fast." A pause, "not far." I looked around at the grass, the sky, the line of cottonwood down toward the creek 3 miles south. Nothing else for a long way. I said, "There is a camp, 2 hours by horse." She looked at me. I said, "I can carry you, or you can ride behind me if you can grip." She looked at my horse, a gray she-horse named Pahinska, white mane, because she had a mane the color of old ivory, and she was smarter than most men I'd ridden with. The woman studied white mane the way you study something before you trust your life to it. She said, "I'll ride." I helped her up. She was heavier than her frame suggested, which meant there was something solid left in her despite 3 days with a dead horse. She held the back of my belt and nothing else, not my waist, not my coat, just the belt. Her grip was strong. We didn't talk those 2 hours. The wind was behind us and there was rain coming in low from the northwest, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just arrives. White mane moved easy, and the woman moved with her the way someone moves who has ridden before. When we came into camp, people looked. People always look. That is what camps do. I brought her to my sister's lodge. My sister is Winona. She is 4 years younger than me, and she is the person I would have trusted with my life since she was 7 years old, and she has never once made me question that. I said to her in Lakota. She was alone. 3 nights on the plane. The leg is an old wound. Winona nodded and took the woman's arm, and that was that. Her name was Merritt. I didn't learn it for 2 days. The first day she slept. The second day she ate. The second evening, Winona came to where I was sitting working a snapped rein back to usefulness and said to me in English, because Merritt was in the lodge and Winona wanted her to understand. She says her name is Merritt. She says thank you. Then back to Lakota. She's strong. She did not cry once. Not even when I reset the— Winona paused, mimed something at her shin. Reset something, whatever had shifted in those 3 nights. I said in Lakota, what does she want to do? Winona shrugged the way she shrugs when the answer is obvious and she doesn't know why I'm asking. She wants to stay useful. Here is what I learned in pieces over weeks. Merritt was 34. She had been born in a Norwegian family that came to Minnesota when she was 8, and the crossing, which was bad, had done something to the leg. She told it flatly, like a list: bad crossing. The ship moved wrong. She fell into something and the bone broke badly and healed worse. And then she had been what her family quietly called a burden for the rest of her childhood. Not cruel people, her parents. She said that without irony. They were not cruel. They simply did not know what to do with a daughter who would not be fully useful in the way a daughter on a frontier farm was supposed to be useful. When a man offered to marry her, a widower 20 years older, wanting a housekeeper more than a wife, her father was grateful. She understood what the gratitude meant. The widower was not cruel either. She was careful about that word. He was inattentive and he drank and he treated her like something he'd hired, which in a sense he had. He died of a fever 2 years into the marriage and left the farm to a brother in Pennsylvania and Merritt with nothing but the wool coat and the roan horse and the canvas sack. The brother came, assessed the situation, said some words she described to me once as not worth repeating, and rode back east. She'd been riding west for 6 weeks when the horse went down. She told me all this in portions over the weeks, never as a grievance. She had a way of describing her life like she was describing the weather. This happened, then this, and here is what's true now. It took me time to understand that this wasn't cold. It was how she'd kept herself whole. She'd made herself a person who dealt in what was actual and present, because the past had not dealt kindly with her, and the future was theoretical, and the only solid ground was right now. Today, what can be done with what is here? That was a thing I recognized. Winona put her to work tanning hides, which Merritt took to with a quiet focus that Winona reported to me one evening with something close to admiration. She doesn't complain about the leg, Winona said, but I see her at the end of the day, it hurts her. A pause. She just works through it. I had noticed more than that. She moved through the camp with a particular kind of, I want to say, dignity, but that makes it sound formal, and it wasn't formal, it was just very plain. She did not make herself small. She did not charm people or seek to be liked. She worked and she watched, and when someone was near her who was doing something wrong, tying a knot, building a fire against a wind, she would simply reach and fix it without comment, and then go back to what she was doing. The children noticed her first, the way children always notice the one adult who treats them as sensible. They'd sit near her while she worked. She'd hand them small tasks. She didn't speak much Lakota yet, but she was learning it the right way, by listening and not pretending to understand more than she did. One afternoon in October, maybe 6 weeks after I'd brought her in, I was at the edge of camp with a horse who had an abscess in his near forefoot. I'd been at it an hour and wasn't satisfied with what I'd done. Merritt came up beside me and stood watching for a minute. She said, "May I look?" I stepped back. She knelt both knees, adjusting her weight to keep the bad leg at an angle that worked, and took the horse's hoof in her hands the way you take something that is hurting. Not rough, not overcautious, just steady. She looked at it a long while. Then she looked up at me and said, "You've got most of it. There's a little pocket left on the inside here." She showed me with her thumb. "If you open it just there, it will drain clean." I did what she said. It drained clean. She washed her hands in the bucket and stood and didn't make anything of it, just went back to the hide she'd been working. I stood there a minute with that horse dropping his head in relief against my chest, and I thought, she's been paying attention to everything and nobody's been paying attention to her. I want to stop a moment and tell you about that autumn because it matters. I was not a well man that autumn. I had not been well for longer than that if I am being plain about it. The exhaustion I'm talking about isn't the kind that sleep cures. It's the kind that comes from spending too many years holding things together by will alone, the band, the peace, the space between my people and a world that wanted to take everything, while also holding the private damage that nobody sees, which is the damage of a man who lost a wife he should have been home with and wasn't because he was always somewhere else being a chief. Matho, my son, had been angry with me for 2 years. My daughters were grown and gone, married and living their own lives, and that was right. But the camp in the evenings was often very quiet, and I had a habit of sitting too long with old grief like a man who can't step back from a fire that's burning him. I won't tell you I knew any of this at the time. I didn't. I knew I was tired. I knew something in me had gone from granite to something more like dry clay, still holding shape, but crumbling at the edges if you pushed. The fever came in November. It started as a cold and got worse and then very bad. Winona told me later that by the 4th day there was genuine concern. I was not a person who got sick. I am not by nature a person who lies down. So when I lay down and stayed there, the camp noticed. Marit noticed. She came and she assessed me the way she'd assessed that horse, steadily, without fuss. She had some knowledge. She didn't explain where it came from and I didn't ask, but she knew what was lungs and what was gut, and what she was looking at in my case was lungs, and she knew what to do for lungs. She worked with what the camp had. A particular root she had Winona's daughter go find, a poultice, a steam she made by dropping heated stones into a vessel with herbs I didn't know the English names of. She came twice each day and once in the night. She didn't talk much while she worked. She'd ask necessary questions. Does this hurt? Can you breathe deeper? Drink this. When she was done she would sit a moment, not hovering, not anxious, just present. The second night she was there I came partway out of the fever and found her sitting at the edge of the sleeping space with her back against the lodge wall, mending something by the small fire, and I lay there looking at her hands in the firelight for what might have been a long time. She looked up. She said, "You need water." She brought it and held the bowl while I drank, and when I drunk she did not move away immediately. She crouched there, her weight on her good knee, and she looked at me with an expression I would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Not pity, something more like recognition, like she was looking at something she understood. She said very quietly, "You're going to be all right, but you have been tired a long time before this." I didn't say anything. She said, "I see it, you hold everything here." She touched briefly the center of her own chest, not my chest, her own, and then nothing is left. She went back to her mending. I lay there and the fever did something to the walls I keep, and I thought about my wife, Chente Chinianka, she who holds the heart, and about the way she died with me not there, and about my son's anger which was just his grief wearing armor, and about 11 years of keeping 60 people alive by being the person who doesn't waver. I thought about all of it, which I had not allowed myself to do, really, in some years. Then I slept, really slept, the way you sleep when something releases. I woke up the next morning feeling like something had broken, and then set properly. I recovered in the way the body recovers when someone treats it right. By the end of November I was up and working. By December I was back to myself in body, if not entirely in the other ways. Marit stayed. She had not announced she was staying. She had not been invited to stay formally. She had simply continued being there, doing useful things, and we had all continued accommodating her presence, and at some point it had become a given, the way a good tool becomes part of your hand. But she was not a tool. And I had been watching her, in the way I watch things I am thinking about without quite admitting I'm thinking about them. She had, by December, some real Lakota, enough to argue with Winona about the best way to do things, which Winona privately relished. She told me Merritt was the only Wasatch woman who'd ever told her she was wrong and been right about it. Merritt worked. She helped with the children. She had started doing something with the camp's horses that I watched with great attention. She could calm a frightened horse by doing almost nothing, just placing herself near it with a quality of stillness that the horse read as safe. She'd crouch and wait, and the horse would come to her eventually, limping or trembling, and she would do small, precise things to it, and it would settle. I asked her once, "Where did you learn this?" She thought about it. "My father had a horse that nobody could manage," she said. "I had a lot of time to sit near things when I was small. You learn a lot of things when you can't run." She said it without bitterness, just as a fact. "You couldn't run," I said. "Not well," she paused, "but I could sit very still. So I learned things that require patience." I thought about that for a few days. What I felt for her was not something that happened suddenly. I'm not a person who trusts things that happen suddenly. It came the way weather comes from a direction you weren't watching. You turn around and it's already on you. It was December, deep cold. The sky the white that means snow is stacked up waiting to fall. I was at the fire cutting a piece of elk sinew into lengths for bowstring, and she came and sat across from me and didn't say anything, just pulled out the stitching she was doing, and we sat like that for maybe an hour. Just the sound of the fire and the sinew and the stitching and the wind outside, and at some point I realized I had not thought about anything in that hour. I had just been there next to her in the quiet, and my hands had kept moving, and it had been, I looked up and the word that came was, enough. Like I hadn't been enough anywhere in years, and now I was. She looked up from her stitching and caught me looking. She didn't look away. I said, "I want to say something." She waited. I said, "In the spring, if you wanted to stay, not as a guest." As I didn't quite have the Lakota word that fit, and my English was, in intimate things, not easy. I said, "I would want you to stay." She looked at me for a long moment. The fire moved between us. She said, "What would that mean?" "Whatever you want it to mean," I said. "What I'm asking is whether you want to stay." She was quiet a long time. Long enough that I thought I had read it wrong and felt something cold go through me. Then she said, "I've been not belonging somewhere my whole life." She looked down at the stitching, then back up. "I know what that feels like, and I know this doesn't feel like that." I said no. "So yes," she said, "I want to stay." She went back to her stitching. I went back to my sinew. The fire kept going. I should tell you about the morning Matho came. My son rode in February. He was 23, and he had his mother's face and my stubbornness, and he'd been working the ranches east of us for over a year, doing horse work, which he was good at. He came because Winona had sent word, and when he came, he was expecting to find me the way I'd been the last time he saw me, which was hollowed out and sharp with it. He rode into camp and he looked around and he saw Merritt first, because she was at the horse lines doing something to a mare who'd slipped her foal, crouching in the cold with her hands on the mare's neck, talking to her in this low, even voice. He came to me and he said in Lakota, "Who is she?" I said, "Her name is Merritt." He watched her a moment. She had not looked up. He said, "She knows horses." "Yes." He was quiet, then he said, "You look different." I said, "I was sick in November." "I know, Winona wrote me." A pause. "That's not what I mean." We stood there a while. Merritt had gotten the mare to let her check her. She was doing it so carefully, the mare standing quiet as a stone. Matho said, still watching, "She's the one who came and stayed." "Yes." He turned and looked at me, and I looked back, and there was a long moment where we were negotiating, maybe, the way a father and son negotiate the distance they have made between them. He was his mother's boy and he missed her, and he had been angry with me for being somewhere else when she died, and I had no defense for that, only the truth, which is that I had been doing what she would have wanted me to do, and that wasn't comfort enough for either of us. He said finally, "Good." Just that, good. He stayed 3 weeks. He and Merritt talked mostly through work. They fixed 2 horse-bowl travois together and argued quietly about the best way to brace the crosspiece, and she was right, and he conceded it with his jaw set the way I set mine. He left with less of the anger. Not all of it, that would take more time, more work from both of us, but less. The morning he left, he came and stood with me while Merritt was loading her satchel of medicines onto a horse. We were going to ride out to a family camped half a day north who had a sick child, her idea, her insistence. Matho watched her tie the satchel with those sure hands. He said, "She doesn't think the leg defines her." I said, "No, she doesn't." How long did it take her to decide that? I thought about it. I think she decided it when she was very young, I said, and she's been deciding it every day since. He looked at me like I'd said something that mattered. He put his hand on my arm briefly, and then he went and got on his horse and rode east. There is one moment I will carry until I can't carry anything. It was March, first real thaw, the creek running loud with melt. We had ridden out together to check on an elderly woman who lived alone at the edge of our range. Winona worried about her through the winters. We found her well and stubborn and amused by our concern, and we stayed for tea, and she told us a long story about her husband who had been dead 30 years, and she still talked about him with the warmth of someone who expects to see him soon. We rode back in the late afternoon, the sky the pale gold of early spring. The grass was the color of old rope, and the snow was down to patches in the shadows, and the air smelled like cold water and pine and mud, and the exact particular smell that means winter is giving up. We were not talking. We had been together long enough by then that silence between us was an absence. It was just what was. She pulled her horse up on a small rise, and I pulled up beside her, and we looked out over the valley below, the camp smoke rising, the horse line visible, a hawk working a thermal over the cottonwoods. She said, "I used to wonder what a place would feel like if it was mine." I said, "What does it feel like?" She turned and looked at me. Full on, the way she looks at things she isn't afraid of. "Like this," she said. I reached over and she took my hand. Her grip was the same as the first day, firm, no hesitation, no pretense. She held it and we sat there while the hawk made one more pass and the smoke rose from the camp that was hers as much as mine, and the sun went lower and the cold came up from the ground, and neither of us moved. That is what I wanted to tell you about. The man who rode out to check on a dead horse and found a woman who was not going back. The woman who carried nothing and offered nothing except what she was steady and competent and seeing, always seeing, the thing that was actually in front of her. What she did for my body that November I can describe. The root, the poultice, the steam, the careful hands. What she did for the rest of me is harder to put in words. She looked at me, and she saw something worth staying for. I had not been sure for a long time that there was. The camp is bigger now. We have had to move twice since that spring, and we will move again. My son comes when he can. Winona is well and more formidable than ever, and she and Merritt argue about almost everything and understand each other completely. The hawk comes back every spring to the cottonwoods, or a hawk comes. We say the same one. Maybe that's true. Merritt's hands know this land now, in a way that takes years to happen. She knows which roots and which conditions and which horses and which children and which old people need what, and she knows it the way she knows everything, quietly, completely, without any need to show you she knows. She saved my life in November. I mean that in the plain way. Without what she did, I would have gone the wrong direction and not come back. But I also mean it in the other way, the one that isn't about fever at all. I found her sitting with her back against a dead horse, not asking to be saved. She saved me anyway. That is the kind of woman who changes the shape of a life, not by making herself into something soft for you to hold, by being so unmovable and clear and real that you remember what solid ground feels like and you put your feet back on it. The valley below us, that afternoon on the rise. Her hand in mine. The smoke rising from what was ours. That is where this story ends. Not because what came after was less, it wasn't, but because that was the moment I understood it. Understood that I had been given something I did not ask for and did not deserve any more than a man deserves rain. You are just grateful. You are just careful with it. You just make sure you come home,